What if 30 days of trusting God could completely change your financial life? Watch to see the miraculous journey unfold. There are seasons in life when financial pressure becomes more than just numbers on paper. It becomes a storm in the mind, a weight on the heart, and a voice that never stops speaking. Worry begins to sound louder than faith. Nights become long, days feel uncertain, and even the smallest expense starts to look like a mountain that cannot be climbed. That is exactly where my journey began. Right at the point where human strength failed and only God's intervention could make a difference. It wasn't a moment of strength. It was a moment of surrender. On the very first day of this 30-day journey, I didn't ask God for a sudden miracle. Instead, I whispered a simple prayer: Lord, I surrender my worry to you. I don't know how you will do it, but I choose to trust you. That prayer didn't remove the bills instantly. It didn't open the door to financial freedom overnight. But it opened something even more important, the door of peace. I learned something precious. God often changes the heart before He changes the circumstance. We usually want Him to fix everything outside of us: our money, our resources, our bank accounts. But God looks deeper. He sees the fear that controls us. He sees the anxiety that limits us. He sees the doubt that steals our peace. And before He changes our situation, He begins to heal our soul. That is what happened to me. At the start, nothing looked different outside. I still had the same responsibilities and the same limited resources. But something began to change inside. I started noticing that each morning felt lighter than the one before it. The anxiety that once drowned me started losing its strength. I realized that surrender is not giving up. It is handing over the battle to the one who never loses. When I surrendered, God did not immediately answer with money. He answered with clarity, calmness, and strength. My heart started to breathe again. My mind became clearer. I was no longer reacting in panic. I began making wiser decisions. Slowly, I began to see what surrender truly means. It is not about losing control. It is about placing control in the hands of the one who knows the future better than I do. In the second week, something unexpected happened. Little signs of God's provision started appearing. One day, I received a discount on an item I desperately needed. Another day, a past due payment was suddenly settled. Another moment, someone offered help without even knowing what I was going through. These weren't accidents. They were whispers from God saying, I see you. Keep trusting me. That is when I understood that surrender invites divine intervention. When we cling tightly to our worries, we block God's ability to move. But when we release them, we open a space for His provision to enter. Surrender is not weakness. It is partnership with heaven. It is the acknowledgement that we are not alone. There was a situation during those days when I had no idea how to make a certain payment. It was due in only a few days. The pressure was rising. The old me would have panicked. But this time, fear didn't control me. Instead, I prayed, Lord, I don't know how, but I believe you already have a way. I don't know how, but I felt peace even before the answer arrived, almost as if God was saying, you don't need to see the whole plan. Just walk with me. And then something wonderful happened. A friend called me unexpectedly and offered help. It wasn't something I had asked for. It wasn't something I had planned. It was simply the right help at the right time. That moment proved that God doesn't respond to panic, but He responds to surrender. One of the greatest lessons I learned was this: before God opens physical doors, He opens spiritual eyes. After surrender, I started to notice things I never saw before. Opportunities that I once ignored suddenly became visible. Small ideas began to turn into practical solutions. It felt like God was slowly revealing treasure hidden inside ordinary days. My thoughts became clearer. My heart became stronger. My spirit was being prepared for provision. There were moments when fear tried to return, but every time anxiety tried to knock on the door of my mind, I would remind myself, this battle is not mine anymore. I have given it to God. That reminder brought strength. I realized that surrender is not a one-time decision. It is a daily practice. It is waking up every morning and saying, Lord, today I choose peace over panic, faith over fear, and surrender over control. Life didn't become perfect, but it became peaceful, and peace is the foundation upon which provision is built. A worried mind cannot think clearly. A fearful spirit cannot receive ideas. An anxious heart cannot recognize God's voice. But when the heart becomes peaceful, room is made for miracles. I noticed that when I surrendered worry, God began to introduce wisdom. When I stopped trying to control everything, opportunities began to appear naturally. When I let go of fear, faith began to guide me step by step. Then, slowly, doors began to open, not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily, gently, like the morning sun rising after a long night. Each breakthrough felt like a quiet message from God saying, this is the result of your surrender. You trusted me. Now I am showing you my faithfulness. Looking back at that season, I can say one thing with certainty. God did not remove every problem instantly, but He removed the fear that made those problems seem impossible. He didn't answer my prayers in minutes, but He never left me alone for a moment. He didn't just give me provision. He gave me peace, clarity, courage, and a new way of thinking. And those things are far more valuable than money. I learned that God's financial blessing does not always begin with money. It begins with surrender. Surrender leads to peace. Peace leads to clarity. Clarity leads to wisdom. Wisdom leads to decisions. And decisions lead to provision. It is a divine chain reaction. But it starts with surrender. When I surrendered my worry, provision came. Not just financial provision, but spiritual provision, emotional provision, mental provision, inner peace that no money could buy. That is when I truly understood the greatest financial miracle is not just when God provides. It is when He proves that we were never alone in the battle. Giving is one of the most counterintuitive acts a person can perform when facing financial uncertainty. When I first began this 30-day journey, I was overwhelmed by scarcity. Bills were pressing, my savings were low, and I constantly wondered how I would make ends meet. Every logical thought screamed, keep everything you have, don't risk anything, hold on tightly. Yet, early in this journey, God whispered something that felt impossible, give, even if it seems you have nothing. I remember feeling conflicted. How could I give when I barely had enough for myself? How could I release resources when I feared there might be none left? But something inside nudged me. God was teaching me a principle beyond logic. The first act of giving was small, almost symbolic. I shared a little money with someone who needed help, an amount that to me was significant. I didn't see it as a grand gesture. I didn't expect a miraculous return. Yet the act of releasing that small portion of what I had brought an immediate shift in my heart. For the first time in months, I felt light, not weighed down. It was as though a burden I had carried for years was lifted, and I could breathe again. I realized then that giving is not about losing. It is about trusting. It is about acknowledging that God owns what we hold in our hands, and we are simply stewards. That day, I began to observe the principle of sowing and reaping in real life. Almost immediately, small blessings began to trickle into my life. It wasn't instantaneous or dramatic, no sudden windfall or instant payment, but subtle, perfectly timed events that seemed orchestrated. A friend unexpectedly offered to help with a minor expense. A bill was delayed just long enough for me to catch up. Discounts appeared on things I needed most. Each of these moments, though small, was like a soft whisper from God saying, I am watching. Keep trusting and giving. I realized that giving is less about the physical act and more about the heart behind it. The world measures wealth by accumulation, but God measures blessings by faithfulness. It's not the size of what we give that matters. It's the willingness to release it despite our fear of lack. Every time I gave during those 30 days, my faith grew stronger. My hands remained open, and my heart began to trust that giving never empties a soul, it enlarges it. Every act of generosity became a declaration of faith. I may not have much, but I trust God has enough for me. The spiritual economy is fundamentally different from the world's economy. In the natural, giving reduces what you have. In God's kingdom, giving increases what you have. This principle became clear as I continued my journey. I started noticing that every time I gave without expectation, God multiplied it. Not always immediately, but in divine timing. Sometimes the return was financial. Sometimes it was protection from an unseen loss. Sometimes it was an opportunity or a connection that led to more blessings than I could have imagined. The common thread was that faithful giving always produces return, even if it is not visible at first. There were moments when the act of giving tested my resolve. On several occasions, I wanted to hold back, reasoning that I might need that money later. The logical part of my mind screamed, don't risk it. But faith required risk. Faith required action without the safety net of certainty. Each time I chose to give, I saw the fear in my mind begin to fade. I learned that fear thrives in closed hands and anxious hearts. Generosity, even when costly, is a statement of trust. I believe God is my provider. Beyond material blessings, giving reshaped my perspective on scarcity and abundance. I began to notice that abundance is not measured by the balance in our bank accounts, but by the capacity of our hearts to bless others. I may have had little by worldly standards, but I discovered I had more than enough to make a difference in someone else's life. And in every act of giving, I felt a sense of joy and peace that no money could buy. Generosity became a spiritual exercise, a daily reminder that God's provision is not limited by what we see. It is limitless when we act in faith. As the days progressed, the principle of giving began to manifest in ways I had never expected. A small contribution I made to a charity or a person in need opened doors for me personally. Not all at once, not in ways that screamed miracle, but in steady, consistent ways that built momentum. I began receiving opportunities at work, support from friends, and timely guidance that aligned with my financial needs. Every blessing, no matter how small, reminded me that God's economy operates on a principle of return and multiplication. The universe, aligned with faith, begins to respond when we obey God's commands to give. What amazed me most was how giving transformed my internal landscape. Anxiety, which had been my constant companion, began to dissipate. Worry, which once dominated my mornings, started to lose its grip. I felt lighter, freer, more capable of facing challenges. I realized that giving doesn't just impact external circumstances. It transforms the giver from within. It trains the heart to trust, the mind to think differently, and the spirit to see beyond immediate lack. In essence, giving becomes an instrument through which God reshapes our character even before He reshapes our circumstances. By the end of the 30 days, one truth became undeniably clear. Giving is not a subtraction. It is an investment of faith, hope, and trust that God multiplies in His perfect timing. The money I released, the time I shared, the resources I offered, all became channels of blessing that returned in unexpected ways. I saw firsthand that generosity is not measured by how much you have, but by how much you trust God with what you have. Each act of giving, no matter how small, is a seed planted in fertile soil. And seeds, when planted with faith, grow into a harvest beyond measure. Reflecting on this journey, I can say with certainty, my hands did not become empty when I gave. They became vessels of blessing. My heart did not grow poorer, it grew richer. My trust in God did not diminish, it expanded. I discovered that true abundance is not about accumulation. It's about alignment with God's will. It's about stepping into faith, even when resources are scarce. It's about choosing to give, knowing that what God provides is never limited, never late, and always sufficient. And the most beautiful part of this journey, generosity became a lifestyle, not a single act. It was no longer about occasional giving. It became about a continual posture of openness, trust, and faith. Every time I chose to give, I reaffirmed my belief that God's provision is more reliable than my calculations, His timing more perfect than my plans, and His abundance more certain than my fears. My hands, once closed and hesitant, were now open, ready to receive, ready to bless, and ready to participate in God's miraculous work in both my life and the lives of others. One of the most profound discoveries I made during this 30-day journey is the power of words. Before this experience, I underestimated how much the things we speak over our lives can shape our reality. I thought words were simply expressions, tools to communicate. But during these 30 days, I realized that words are not just communication. They are spiritual seeds that carry authority. They create influence and even unlock what seems impossible. The words we speak can either empower our faith or amplify our fear. For decades, I had unknowingly been speaking statements of limitation over my finances, and as a result, lack gained authority in my life. Every morning, I would wake up and hear a familiar script in my mind. I cannot pay this bill. I don't have enough. Nothing is working. Those words may have seemed harmless, but they were anchors. They pulled my mind down into anxiety, fear, and doubt. They painted scarcity as my reality, and slowly they shaped my decisions. I began to realize that the same mouth that complained, feared, or doubted was effectively declaring the limitations of my life. Words, I discovered, are like tools that carve the spiritual atmosphere around us. Negative words create scarcity. Faith-filled words create abundance. So I made a deliberate choice to shift my language. I stopped describing lack. I stopped dwelling on fear. Instead, I began speaking life over my circumstances. Every morning, I declared out loud, God is my provider, and I will not lack. Opportunities are opening for me today. My finances are increasing according to God's perfect plan. I will prosper and bless others in every season. At first, these words felt strange. They didn't always match my current reality. I had unpaid bills, limited resources, and constant worry. But that is the essence of faith. It speaks before the evidence appears. Faith is not waiting for conditions to change. It is declaring truth and trusting God to align circumstances. In speaking these words consistently, I noticed a shift, not immediately in my bank account, but in my mind. My perspective began to change. Where I once saw scarcity, I began to see possibilities. Where I once felt hopeless, I began to feel hope. Where I once panicked, I began to strategize. This transformation did not happen overnight. There were mornings when my old doubts returned, whispering, nothing is happening. You'll never make it. Each time those thoughts emerged, I reminded myself to declare faith instead of fear. And slowly, I noticed something miraculous. The more I spoke faith, the less power fear had over me. Lack started losing authority. not because the bills disappeared instantly, but because my perspective changed. My decisions became wiser, my mind became clearer, and my spirit became stronger. I began realizing that speaking faith is more than positive thinking. It is spiritual warfare. Words can either invite God's provision or give power to lack. And during these 30 days, I committed to giving authority to faith, not fear. I also noticed that the words I spoke affected not only my mindset, but my actions. Fear often immobilizes people. Anxiety paralyzes decisions. But faith-filled words empower movement. When I spoke, God is opening doors for me. I started seeking opportunities I previously ignored. When I declared, "I will not lack," I approached challenges with courage instead of hesitation. When I consistently said, "God provides," I stopped doubting assistance and became more receptive to help. Words changed my internal landscape, and in turn, my external actions followed. Faith without action is incomplete, and action without faith is limited. But words spoken in faith bridge both. One day, I faced a financial obligation that seemed impossible. The pressure was intense, and part of me wanted to panic. But instead, I declared aloud, "Lord, you are my provider. I will see your hand in this situation." I repeated it several times. I spoke it to myself, wrote it down, and even whispered it in prayer. Within a few days, unexpected help came. A payment I thought would be delayed was processed. A friend reached out with advice that unlocked a solution. Another opportunity arrived that covered a portion of what I needed. The sequence of events could hardly have been coincidence. This experience taught me that speaking faith shifts the spiritual atmosphere, making room for God's provision and influence to manifest in tangible ways. The principle became clear: what you declare repeatedly becomes the reality you live in. Lack may seem powerful, but it has no authority over the words of faith. Scarcity may appear threatening, but it cannot stand against consistent declarations of trust in God. I realized that many of us unknowingly give power to lack by what we speak. Phrases like, "I can't afford this," "I don't know how I'll survive," or "nothing works for me," are not harmless complaints. They are agreements with scarcity. But when we replace those statements with declarations of God's provision, we align our words with His power. We are not pretending. We are activating unseen spiritual principles. By the end of the 30 days, I had developed a daily habit. Every morning, I would intentionally speak faith over my finances, my decisions, and my future. I would write down statements of God's promises, declare them aloud, and let them saturate my mind before the noise of the day entered. Fear tried to re-enter at times, but it had lost its authority. My tongue, once a tool of doubt, became an instrument of faith. My words no longer mirrored the scarcity around me. They reflected the abundance of God. And as I spoke faith, I began to notice God working in ways I hadn't imagined. Opportunities, assistance, and solutions aligned perfectly, as if the very universe was responding to my declarations. This journey taught me the eternal truth: faith speaks first, and provision follows. Words have the power to remove fear, dismantle limitations, and weaken the authority of lack. Consistently declaring faith over your life builds a spiritual atmosphere in which miracles can happen. It trains your mind, strengthens your heart, and prepares your spirit to receive what God has promised. Lack cannot reign where faith speaks loudly. Scarcity cannot dominate where hope is declared. Fear cannot control when trust is vocalized. The most profound lesson from this keynote is simple but life-changing. Your words matter more than you realize. Speak faith, speak truth, speak victory. Stop describing the problem and start declaring God's promises. Stop agreeing with scarcity and start aligning with abundance. What you speak aloud has the power to alter your mindset, influence your actions, and even shape your reality. As I continued this journey, I realized that lack only has authority if we allow it. But when we consistently speak faith, lack begins to lose its power, fear begins to shrink, and God's provision begins to manifest. By the conclusion of this journey, I can confidently say, speaking faith changed my life before any financial increase occurred. It prepared me to receive, strengthened my heart to persevere, and aligned me with the supernatural work of God. What I spoke became what I lived. What I declared became what I experienced. And in that process, I learned that faith is not just believing. It is speaking with authority over the invisible, trusting that God will respond in the natural. As the final week of my 30-day journey unfolded, I entered a season that was both the most challenging and the most transformative. The first 3 weeks had taught me surrender, generosity, and speaking faith. But there remained one final lesson: full, unwavering trust in God. Not partial trust, not cautious hope, but complete reliance on His timing, His wisdom, and His supernatural provision. I realized that this final step was essential because partial trust produces partial breakthroughs, but total trust unlocks supernatural doors. In the past, I had tried to manage everything myself. I had calculated, budgeted, planned, and worried. I thought trust meant waiting quietly while keeping control in my hands. But during these 30 days, God began to show me that trust is not passive. It is active surrender. Trust requires letting go of control, stepping out in obedience, and believing even when you cannot see the way. It is declaring, Lord, I do not know the outcome, but I know you are faithful. This type of trust changes everything. One morning, I faced a challenge that could have broken me. A major financial obligation loomed, and the resources I expected had not yet arrived. Anxiety knocked at the door of my thoughts, tempting me to panic. But instead of reacting in fear, I whispered, God, I trust you completely. I don't know how, but I know you are working. That moment of surrender was unlike anything I had experienced before. I didn't just choose faith. I fully released my doubts, my calculations, and my control. And in that release, I felt an unexpected peace that washed over me, quieting the fear that had haunted me for years. The following days were a testimony to the power of full trust. Opportunities appeared that I could never have engineered. A call came from an old client offering work at the exact moment I needed it. A friend reached out with financial guidance that I had not considered. A bill that seemed impossible to pay suddenly became manageable due to a timely adjustment. Each event felt so precisely timed that I realized it could only have been orchestrated by God. Full trust had opened a supernatural pathway that human planning alone could never have created. I began to understand that full trust works in layers. First, it shifts the heart. When we truly trust, fear loses its grip, anxiety begins to fade, hope rises, confidence grows. Second, it influences decisions. Trust allows us to move forward without hesitation. It enables us to take steps we would otherwise avoid because of fear. Third, it aligns circumstances. When the heart and mind are fully surrendered, God can orchestrate situations, people, and resources in ways that defy human understanding. Trust becomes the invisible bridge between challenge and provision. During this time, I also learned that full trust is tested when it is delayed. There were moments when I questioned whether God had forgotten me. Days went by without visible answers. Resources seemed distant. But in those moments, I reminded myself that God works quietly before He works suddenly. Just because I could not see the solution did not mean it wasn't on its way. Trusting fully requires patience and perseverance, and it is in these moments of waiting that our faith is refined. I recall one particular day when everything seemed impossible. I had exhausted all logical options. Fear whispered, "It's over. You will fail." But my heart, strengthened by 30 days of practice, responded with faith. "God, you are my provider. I will not fear. I trust you." That very evening, an unexpected opportunity arose. Someone offered a solution I could not have imagined. The obstacle that had seemed insurmountable was removed. In that moment, I realized that full trust is not just belief. It is an invitation for God to intervene supernaturally. This principle extends beyond finances. It applies to relationships, health, career, and every aspect of life. When we place our trust fully in God, we align ourselves with His wisdom and timing. We stop forcing solutions that may not be part of His plan. We stop worrying about outcomes that are beyond our control. And we open ourselves to receive blessings that are far greater than anything we could create on our own. I also noticed a spiritual transformation within myself. Full trust replaced fear with courage, anxiety with peace, and doubt with expectation. I began to anticipate God's movement rather than stress over what had not yet arrived. I walked with confidence, not because I had all the answers, but because I knew the one who does. This trust became a shield against discouragement. It became a lens through which I could see solutions, even in challenging circumstances. And it became a magnet that attracted provision in ways that seemed supernatural. Reflecting on this journey, I realized that the breakthrough I experienced was not only about finances. It was about transformation. God used these 30 days to reshape my character, my mindset, and my spirit. He taught me that true provision begins in the heart. When I trusted Him fully, everything else began to align. I experienced the truth of Proverbs 3:5-6a. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your paths. Full trust creates a pathway for God to move, often in ways we cannot predict. By the end of this journey, I had learned several profound truths. Trusting fully is an active choice, not a passive feeling. Trust removes the power of fear and doubt. Trust aligns circumstances with God's will. Trust invites supernatural provision, guidance, and protection. The ultimate lesson was clear: when you trust God fully, a way opens supernaturally. Obstacles that once seemed impossible become stepping stones. Opportunities appear when there seems to be no path. Resources arrive when they are most needed. Peace fills the gaps that fear once occupied. This type of trust is not dependent on circumstances. It is anchored in the faithfulness of God. I now understand that financial breakthroughs or any kind of provision are not purely about strategy, effort, or planning. They are about surrender, giving, speaking faith, and ultimately trusting fully. These four pillars work together. They build a foundation on which God can move. And the final piece, full trust, is the one that allows the supernatural to intersect with the natural. Without it, progress remains limited. With it, doors open in ways that human hands cannot create. This final week of my journey proved that God's timing is perfect. He responds not when we demand, but when we are ready, when we have surrendered completely, given generously, spoken with faith, and learned to trust fully. And the results are profound. Provision comes, fear disappears, faith grows, and life begins to operate on a higher divine plane. In conclusion, this 30-day journey taught me that full trust is the ultimate key to supernatural breakthrough. When we surrender our control completely, when we act in faith and generosity, when we speak words of hope and faith, and when we trust God with unwavering commitment, lack loses its authority, fear loses its power, and provision flows. A way opens supernaturally, and we experience the fullness of God's promise.